All right. So, you've been bringing us some really interesting stuff to dig into lately, and this one's a good one.
Yeah.
This is something that I think a lot of people are going to relate to.
hmm
It's that pain behind or around the kneecap,
Yeah.
patellofemoral pain, PFP.
Right.
And you've brought us some really fascinating sources to look at.
Yeah, you've given us a good mix, actually. You've
Yeah.
given us a study which has pooled data from some clinical trials
Okay.
in Australia and the Netherlands, so quite a broad
Wow.
kind of a sample there.
Yeah, that's a wide range.
And then you've also given us a study which has looked at the opinions of expert clinicians
Oh,
in
interesting.
terms of how they view PFP and how they treat it.
Okay, so getting down into the on the ground, what are people actually doing?
That's it.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and then just to top it off, we've got a Cochrane review,
Nice.
which summarizes the research on exercise therapy.
For this condition.
Yeah, for PFP.
Perfect. Okay.
So a really nice mix, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So what we're going to do today in this deep dive is we're going to look at all these sources and see what they tell us
Mm-hmm.
about the nature of PFP,
Yeah.
what the long-term outlook is for people.
Mm-hmm.
And then crucially, we're going to look at what kinds of interventions might be
Yeah.
the most helpful.
Absolutely.
So that's our mission today, to really unpack all this without getting too lost
Yeah.
in the weeds.
Without overloading people with too much information.
Exactly. Okay, so let's start with just understanding the problem itself.
Okay, well, the thing that kind of jumps out at you from the pooled data
Okay.
is this kind of quite sobering statistic, really, and that is that around 40% of individuals with PFP in that study
Mhm.
experienced what they considered an unfavorable recovery at 12 months.
Okay.
Now, what makes that particularly striking, I think,
Yeah.
is that it's actually a higher percentage than those
Rep.
in the original trials who received minimal intervention.
So you'd expect that doing something would be better than doing nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
But this is suggesting that actually
yeah.
PFP isn't something that just goes away on its own.
Mm-hmm.
And even when people receive some form of treatment,
Yeah.
a significant number still struggle.
That's right. And I think it's really important to emphasize as well
Yeah.
that the researchers point out that this isn't just about
Right.
knee discomfort.
Yeah.
Persistent PFP can have a much broader impact
Okay.
on people's lives.
Yeah.
It can affect their ability to perform everyday tasks,
Right.
maintain their work or, be physically active,
Right.
participate in social activities.
Oh, yeah.
And it can even impact mental and general health.
It really does paint a picture beyond just, a bit of knee pain,
Yeah, absolutely.
which,
Absolutely.
yeah, really impacting people's lives. Okay, so let's move on now to another thing that really stood out,
Yeah.
which was this factor of how long someone's been experiencing this pain
Yes.
before they seek help.
Yes. This emerged as a surprisingly strong predictor of long-term prognosis.
Okay.
So the study found that having PFP symptoms for more than 2 months
More than 2 months.
before receiving an intervention was associated with an unfavorable recovery at 12 months.
So more than 2 months, that's like a
Yeah.
critical window almost.
It seems to be, yeah.
Wow, can you tell us a bit more about how strong that association was?
Yeah. So they actually use statistical models
Okay.
to look at, a number of different factors
Okay.
and to see which ones were most strongly associated with
Yeah.
the outcome.
Mhm.
And those models showed that having a baseline PFP duration of more than 2 months
Okay.
significantly increased the odds
Yeah.
of not having a good recovery
At a year.
at 12 months.
Right, okay.
Yeah. They also identified another factor,
Yeah, cool.
which is that a lower score on the anterior knee pain scale,
Okay.
so less than 70 out of 100,
Okay.
which indicates worse pain and function initially, was also associated with a poorer 12-month outcome.
So if you're listening to this and you've been putting off getting that knee pain checked out,
Yeah.
this is a really,
A bit of a red flag.
yeah, big red flag. Seek help sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
It sounds like that early intervention piece, as you said, is crucial
It really is.
based on this data.
Yeah. And this kind of brings us on really nicely to the Cochrane review.
Okay.
which, as we said, looked specifically at exercise therapy for PFP.
Okay.
So this is a review that has, pulled together the findings of many different studies
Right.
to try and get a clearer picture of what the evidence is telling us.
Yeah. Okay. So what's the headline takeaway message from the Cochrane review regarding exercise?
Well, I think the overarching conclusion based on their analysis
Ah,
is that there is some evidence,
okay.
although they rated it as very low quality,
Okay.
to suggest that exercise therapy may lead to a clinically important reduction in pain
Okay.
and an improvement in function, and that this could be both in the short term
Okay.
and the long term.
All right. So both
Yeah.
short and long-term benefit.
Yeah. And they also found that it may enhance long-term recovery
Okay.
compared with control interventions.
And when you say control interventions, you mean like,
So that would be things like no treatment,
okay,
placebo treatment, or waiting list controls.
kind of. Okay.
So compared to those things,
Yeah.
there was some suggestion that exercise therapy might be better at promoting
Go.
long-term recovery.
You keep saying, though, very low quality evidence.
Yeah.
So what does that actually mean for someone who's listening?
It means we have to be a little bit cautious
Okay.
about how strongly we interpret the findings.
Okay.
So while it seems that
Yeah.
the general suggestion is that exercise is helpful,
Right.
we can't be 100% certain
Okay.
about the magnitude of that effect.
Right.
Because the studies that they looked at did have some
Yeah.
limitations in their design or how they were conducted.
Okay.
Having said that, though,
When they pulled the data from those studies, they did see some trends.
Okay.
So they found that exercise therapy tended to favor both short and long-term pain during activity,
Okay.
usual pain, short and long-term functional ability,
Okay.
and long-term recovery.
Right. So it's looking like exercise is generally pointing in the right direction.
I think so, yeah.
But we just can't be sure about the magnitude
That's right.
or, for whom it's going to be most effective
Exactly.
based on this review. Okay.
Yeah,
The review also looked at different types of exercise.
it did.
And I know that's something that a lot of people with PFP are curious about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what did they find?
So this is where things get a little bit less clear.
Yeah.
And a lot of it comes back to this kind of very low quality evidence thing.
Okay.
But one area that they did look at is the difference between exercise programs that include both hip and knee exercises
Okay.
versus those that just focus on the knee. Right, because that's a common question, right?
It is, yeah.
Hip versus knee only.
Yeah. So what they found there was, again, it was very low certainty evidence,
Okay.
but it suggested that hip plus knee exercises might provide a clinically important reduction in pain during activity
Okay.
and usual pain in the short term, and then in pain during activity in the long term,
Okay.
compared to just knee exercises.
Okay.
They didn't find a difference in terms of functional ability
Okay.
or recovery
Got it.
between the two approaches.
Okay, so slight suggestion that maybe including the hips is a good idea.
Perhaps. Yeah, big asterisk.
Yeah, big asterisk.
Okay.
Low certainty evidence.
What about some of the other exercise variables that they looked at, like
Yeah.
open chain versus closed chain?
Yeah.
Or supervised versus
Home exercise.
home exercise? What did they find there?
Again, a lot of the evidence in those areas
Okay.
was very low quality.
Right.
And it often wasn't conclusive.
Okay.
They got kind of mixed results.
Across different pain and function measures?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, when they compared closed chain exercises, like squats,
Right.
where your feet are fixed on the ground,
Yeah.
to open chain exercises like leg extensions,
Right.
where your foot is free to move,
Right.
the findings were inconsistent.
Okay.
And actually, and this was kind of interesting, they didn't find
Yeah.
that supervised exercise
Right.
consistently showed a significant advantage over home exercise programs.
That's interesting, right? Because you would think
You would, yeah.
having someone there guiding you
Yeah, absolutely.
would lead to
Better outcome.
a better outcome.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it kind of suggests that perhaps just sticking with the
It does.
exercise
It
is,
is.
is more important
Yeah.
in adherence.
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and there was one other kind of interesting point
Yeah.
that came up,
Okay.
which touches on this whole exercise thing. And actually, this came from the expert opinion piece. But they highlighted a recent study which found superior outcomes with what they call a high-dose rehabilitation program.
High dose. Okay.
And that involved 7 exercises and 60 minutes.
7 exercises, 60 minutes.
Yeah. Now, that's quite a contrast to what a lot of the experts recommend,
Well,
which is to keep things simple.
Yeah.
Stick to 3 or 4 exercises.
Adherence.
Yeah, for better compliance.
Okay.
So again, it kind of highlights
That's not
they
clear.
were not quite sure
Yeah.
what the ideal approach is.
Yeah, we still got a lot to learn
We do.
about exercise prescription for PFP.
Okay, so let's shift our attention now to the expert clinicians themselves.
Okay.
What did they have to say?
So one of the really consistent messages that came from the expert interviews was that PFP is a multifactorial condition.
Okay, so it's not just one thing.
It's rarely just one thing
Okay,
causing the pain.
that makes sense.
It's usually a combination of factors.
Yeah, given all the different things that we hear about.
Yeah. Muscle imbalances, biomechanics,
Absolutely.
all that stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so if it's so complex,
Yeah.
what does that mean for how we treat it?
Well, I think it strongly suggests that a one-size-fits-all approach
Right.
is unlikely to be very effective.
Okay.
So while multimodal physiotherapy,
Yeah.
which combines various treatment methods,
Right.
is often considered the gold standard,
Mm-hmm.
the experts really highlighted the importance of individualizing
Okay.
treatment programs.
So even if the general recommendation is physiotherapy,
Yeah,
the details of that physiotherapy need to be
absolutely.
carefully tailored.
Yeah.
Okay, what do they say about some of the other common things that are done in physiotherapy, like modifying activities?
Yeah, well, activity modification was definitely seen as a crucial first step.
Okay.
So experts often advise patients to reduce or temporarily stop
Yeah.
pain-aggravating activities,
Right.
at least until they can start to address the underlying movement patterns.
Right.
But again, they stress the need to individualize this advice.
Yeah.
And I love this quote from one of the experts.
Oh, yeah?
He said, "You can't tell a runner to stop running.
Right.
You can only guide them to be sensible about their weekly mileage."
Yeah. That's so true.
And I think that's a really nice way
Yeah.
of putting it.
Because you can't just tell everyone to do the same thing.
No.
Yeah. Okay, so what about the exercises themselves?
Okay.
What did they emphasize when it comes to prescribing exercises?
So there were several key principles that came up.
Okay.
Keeping it simple
Okay.
was a big one.
Right.
So a lot of the experts recommended sticking to around 3 to 4 key exercises
Okay.
to improve patient adherence.
So there's that adherence piece again.
Yeah,
Keep it simple
absolutely.
so people will actually do it.
Yeah.
Okay, what else?
They also emphasized the need to balance strength training
Okay.
with movement control exercises.
So it's not just about getting strong. That's about...
It's about controlling movement.
Yeah, okay.
And then finally, they stressed that the exercises should be done regularly
Of course.
and they should be specific to the patient's functional goals.
So what they want to achieve.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So what they want to be able to do without pain.
Keep it simple. Make sure it's good movement.
Yeah.
Focused on what the person wants to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
And do it consistently.
Consistently,
Yeah. Okay, great. Did they mention any specific opinions on particular exercises
They did, yeah.
or muscle groups?
Yeah. So, for example, some of the experts suggested incorporating exercises for the feet and ankles,
Okay.
particularly if someone has overpronation.
So that's where the foot rolls in too much.
Exactly. Yeah. And while quadricep strengthening
Yeah.
is often, the go-to for knee pain.
The classic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some experts felt that the primary driver might actually be coming from elsewhere.
Okay.
So hip mechanics or foot mechanics?
So it's not necessarily always the quads.
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
Gluteal and hip strengthening was also frequently mentioned
Okay.
as being important for controlling movement at the hip and the pelvis.
Yeah.
Although they did highlight that, the evidence for its direct impact on PFP
Yeah.
is somewhat limited.
So there's that asterisk again.
Yeah.
Okay.
But they often take a more holistic view, I think,
yeah.
looking beyond just the knee itself.
Okay. What about things like ultrasound and manual therapy?
Yeah, so the general consensus
Okay.
was a lack of strong belief in these kind of passive local interventions,
Okay.
like ultrasound.
Right.
And that's mainly due to the lack of high-quality research to show that they're truly effective.
And again, that really aligns with the Cochrane review,
It does, yeah.
which was very much focused on
On exercise.
exercise is the main thing.
Yeah.
Okay, now one of the things that you mentioned that I thought was really interesting is this idea of psychological and social factors.
Right.
So what role do they play?
Well, the experts believe that these factors, which include things like stress levels, anxiety, beliefs about pain,
Right.
coping mechanisms, can play a significant role in PFP,
Okay.
especially when the pain becomes chronic.
Right.
or long-lasting.
Okay.
And they even suggested that these factors might explain why some individuals don't benefit from
Right.
physical interventions alone.
So it's not just about the physical mechanics of the knee.
No.
It's about...
There's a psychological component as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a really important piece of the puzzle.
Absolutely.
So bringing it all together now,
Yeah.
what's the take-home message?
Well, I think going back to that initial study that pulled together the trial data,
Yeah.
their conclusions really echo what the experts told us
Right.
and what the Cochrane Review suggested.
Yeah.
And that is they highlighted a need for more public and health professional education on the importance of early intervention for PFP.
To maximize
maximize the prognosis.
Right. And we keep coming back to this 2-month time frame,
Yeah.
which seems to be
a recurring theme.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the key messages, really, is that, PFP that's been going on for more than 2 months.
Yeah.
Seems to be
a bit of a warning sign.
Yeah, a red flag potentially for a less favorable long-term prognosis.
Okay. And that first study also mentioned a potential long-term consequence.
It did. Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, it was really interesting, actually.
Can you tell us about that?
So they highlighted this proposed relationship between PFP and patellofemoral joint osteoarthritis later in life.
Right.
So they're suggesting that addressing PFP early on might not just have benefits for the immediate pain, but it might also have benefits for long-term
musculoskeletal health. Okay, so early intervention not only helps in the short term, but could play a role in maintaining long-term knee health.
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay, so for you, our listener, let's recap. What have we learned?
So we've learned that patellofemoral pain is a complex condition, and a significant proportion of individuals don't experience a full recovery within a year, even with treatment.
Right.
Having symptoms for more than 2 months before seeking help appears to be a strong predictor of a less favorable outcome.
Okay.
Exercise therapy does show promise for reducing pain and improving function.
Yeah.
But the specifics of the program, what exercises to do, how intensely to do them, whether to include the hips.
Yeah.
Those things still need a bit more high-quality research before we can give definitive answers.
Figure that out.
Yeah. And then expert clinicians really emphasize the multifactorial nature of PFP.
Yeah.
And they highlighted the need for tailored treatment plans that consider not just exercises, but also things like modifying activity levels and addressing potential psychological and social factors.
Right. So it's a whole person approach.
It is, yeah.
Not just a knee approach.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that brings us to our final thought for you to consider.
Okay.
Given that a significant number of people with PFP don't have a good recovery within a year, despite various treatments.
Yeah.
And given the emphasis from those experts on individualizing care.
Yeah.
What if the most crucial element for better outcomes
Okay.
isn't just about what exercises are prescribed, but it's about really understanding why a specific person developed PFP in the first place?
Yeah.
Their unique biomechanics, their patterns of activity, their psychological well-being. These are all factors that these sources touched upon, but didn't fully explore in terms of individual recovery.
Right.
So maybe that's where the next level of understanding needs to go.
Perhaps, to
really be able to effectively tackle this common and often persistent condition.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much for bringing us this
You're welcome.
amazing set of sources.
It's been a pleasure.
And for this deep dive into patellofemoral pain.
My pleasure.
Until next time.
See you later.